So for our second part of discussion, we will now talk about or tackle about your cellular injury and cell death. So actually, this is in chapter 2 of your Robbins, including your general pathology. So let's have first an overview of cellular responses to stress and your noxious stimuli. So take a look at this diagram. So this is your normal cell. So your cells actively interact with their environment. It is constantly adjusting their structures and functions to accommodate changing demands and extracellular stresses. So your cell or the intracellular milieu of your cells is normally or tightly regulated such that it remains fairly constant, a state referred to as your homeostasis. So it has to maintain an intracellular milieu. So it is very much regulated para ma-maintain yung homeostasis ng ating normal cell. However, our normal cell continuously being exposed to different stresses. So that's why our cells need to adapt because of the presence of these stresses. However, if our cell cannot adapt or there is inability to adapt, what will happen? There will be cellular injury. If that cellular injury is only mild or transient, then that's gonna be a reversible injury and the cell can go back to a normal cell or in its homeostatic state. However, if it's an injurious stimuli, it will go directly to cellular injury. And this cellular injury may become severe or progressive. When this cellular injury is severe or progressive, anong nangyayari? Magkakaroon tayo ng irreversible injury. And we do not want that for the cell to happen because that is now your cell death. Your cell death has two types. Irreversible injury can be your necrosis and your apoptosis. For our discussion for this day, our main goal now is to identify the different types of cell injury. Yung adaptation will be discussed by Dr. Ian sa next natin na lesson. So ang lecture natin is all about the cell injury, the reversible injury, and the irreversible injury. Adaptation will be discussed by Dr. Ian. So again, another overview. Let's take a look at this example. This is your myocyte. This is actually your heart. This is the normal gross anatomy of your heart, the normal myocyte. So when your heart is being exposed to different stresses, for example, there is increased blood pressure. Anong nangyayari pag mataas ang blood pressure? Then the heart must have exert greater mechanical effort para makapag-transmit siya or transport siya ng blood all throughout the body because of the increased blood pressure. That is why, because of that stress na mataas ang blood pressure, what would happen? Your normal myocyte will adapt in response to increased load. Kaya nagiging hypertrophic ang ating puso. As what you can see here sa gross, the left ventricular is hypertrophied or lumalaki to compensate with increased blood pressure. This part will be discussed or tackled again by Dr. Ian. Ang ating main goal here is to discuss about the cell injury. Kaya lang, if your normal myocyte becomes injured, yes, pwede pa siyang ma-reverse. However, when it becomes severe or progressive, then that's the time that there will be possible cell death. So ito lang yung gusto kong malaman nyo. This is just an overview. So right now, let's talk about the different causes of cellular injury. Meron tayong tinatawag na hypoxia and ischemia. Pag sinabi nating hypoxia, it refers to oxygen deficiency. So oxygen deficient. So deficient ka ng oxygen. Very simple. And ischemia, which means reduced blood supply, which are among the most common causes of cell injury. So, hypoxia and ischemia is the most common causes of injury. Pag hypoxia, oxygen deficiency. Pag ischemia, reduced blood supply. However, the most common cause of your hypoxia is ischemia. Remember, ischemia is a result from an arterial obstruction. So in short, your ischemia is under your hypoxia. So hypoxia is a general term as long as the end result is oxygen deficiency. Kasi nga, sa ischemia, anong nangyayari? Means reduced blood supply. For example, your blood vessel is being blocked by a clot. Then, there will be now a reduced blood supply. Pag may reduced blood supply, is there enough oxygen that can pass through to that certain organ? Of course, wala na. So, the end result of your ischemia is oxygen deficiency. That is why your ischemia is just under your hypoxia. And the most common cause of your hypoxia is ischemia. Very good. Now, let's talk about your toxins. Toxins, potentially toxic agents, are encountered daily in the environment. This includes air pollutants, insecticide, carbon monoxide, asbestos, cigarette smoke, ethanol, and drugs. So, these are the different products that we use or being exposed. Infectious agents. These are the types of disease-causing pathogens, including your viruses, bacteria, fungi, protozoans that can injure your cells. So we know about that. I know that wala pa kayong microbiology, but you will learn more about that when you reach your microbiology on how these infectious agents affects your cells. What else? Meron din tayong immunologic reaction. So it is an autoimmune reactions against one own tissues, allergic reactions against environmental substances, and excessive or chronic immune responses to microbes. Although, as we all know, ang ating immune system will defend our body against your pathogenic microbes. However, your immune reaction can also result in cell and tissue injury. Genetic abnormalities. Your genetic aberration can result in pathologic changes as conspicuous as the congenital malformations associated with Down syndrome or subtle as the single amino acid substitution in hemoglobin, giving rise to sickle cell anemia. So kahit isang gene defect lang nangyari, that could lead to different abnormalities or problems. So genetic defects may cause cell injury as a consequence of deficiency of functional proteins such as spreading enzymes in inborn error of metabolism, or pwede namang accumulation of your damaged DNA or misfolded proteins. Later on, we will see how misfolded proteins affects your cell, both of which actually will trigger your cell death when they are beyond repair. Now, what else? Nutritional imbalances. So, meron tayong protein-calorie insufficiency among impoverished population remains a major cause of cell injury, and specific vitamin deficiencies are not uncommon even in developed countries with high standards of living. Pero ironically, excessive dietary intake may result in obesity and also an important underlying factor in many diseases such as in type 2 DM and your atherosclerosis. So it is not just about being protein calorie insufficient or not just deficiency but also in excess. That's why tinatawag natin na nutritional imbalances. Next, we have also physical agents. Trauma, extremes of temperature, radiation, electric shock, sudden changes in pumipiyok talaga ako. Sudden changes in atmospheric pressure all have wide-ranging effects on cells. Now, how about aging, doc? Sa aging, it's a cellular senescence results in a diminished ability of response to respond to stress and eventually the death of cells and of the organism. So, para lang yung RBC. I know wala pa kayong hematology, but you will encounter this. Your RBC has a lifespan of around 90 to 120 days. When it becomes senescent, it will not be able to do its function. What is the function of red blood cells? To transfer oxygen all throughout the body. That's the main function of RBC. But when it becomes senescent, it will not be able to do its function. That is why it has to be destroyed by the macrophagic system of your spleen so that a new red blood cells may be produced. That's why aging can cause cellular injury to your red blood cells. So these are the different principles that I want you to remember about cellular injury. Ang cellular response natin to the different injury stimuli actually depends on the type of injury, its duration, and its severity. For example, meron akong low dose of toxin or pwedeng brief period ng ischemia, konting oras lang ng ischemia. This may lead to a reversible cell injury. Pero, pag larger toxins, mas severe na toxin or mas mataas na dose ng toxin or mas longer ang duration ng ischemia times, it may result into an irreversible injury. That's why your cellular response will depend on the injury, duration, and severity. Next, the consequences of an injurious stimulus also depend on the type and status, adaptability, and genetic makeup of the injured cell. For example, meron tayong striated skeletal muscle sa ating leg that can tolerate complete ischemia for 2 to 3 hours. Kahit magkaroon ng ischemia ang ating striated skeletal muscle for 2 to 3 hours, there will be no irreversible injury. Pero if that happens in our cardiac muscle will die after 20 to 30 minutes of ischemia. That is why it depends on the type, location, or the ability or the genetic makeup of that cell. Next, cell injury usually results from functional and biochemical abnormalities in one or more of a limited number of essential cellular components. So now we're done with the causes and principle. Ngayon, let's talk about the mechanism. At least dito malalaman natin at a cellular level kung anong ginagawa, bakit yung different causes can cause cellular injury. Tingnan natin. Excuse me. We discussed already about your hypoxia and ischemia. Let's review again. Pag sinabi nating hypoxia, there is a deficiency of oxygen. Ischemia, it's just under your hypoxia. Kasi it will also result in deficiency of your oxygen. But the main mechanism in your ischemia is that there is a blockage or obstruction of your blood flow. So that's your ischemia. So hypoxia and ischemia, deficiency of oxygen, leads to failure of many energy-dependent metabolic pathways and ultimately to the death of cells by necrosis. So ito yon. Remember your biochemistry, your aerobic respiration. That's why guys, you can see, you can really apply what you learned in the previous na mga subjects na na-learn nyo sa first year and second year. Kaya nga, remember, your pathology will really serve as a bridge with your basic sciences such as your biochem, physiology, anatomy. So see, sa ating, remember in your biochemistry, meron tayong natawag na aerobic respiration. Remember your glycolysis? Your glycolysis will convert your glucose into your pyruvate to provide your energy. However, is there enough ATP that glycolysis can provide? Of course, it's not enough. Remember, glycolysis will only provide a net ATP of 4 and 2 lang talaga yung nagagamit. Kasi remember, again, let's just konting review lang. I know you don't like biochem. Sige, konting review lang natin yung glycolysis. Ano nga yung glycolysis? Diba sa glycolysis, meron tayong dalawang phases. Meron tayong investment phase. Pag sinabing investment, umutang ka na. Hindi ka pa nakaka-form ng energy pero umutang ka na ng 2 ATP. So nag-i-invest ka na. Pero sa second phase ng glycolysis, dyan na yung energy producing phase. Dahil nakaka-produce ka ng 4 na energy. Sa 4 na energy nito, remember, babawasan siya ng 2 ATP na inutang natin sa investment phase. So in short, sa glycolysis, there are how many ATPs being produced? Meron tayong a total na 2 ATP. So do you think that is enough? Of course, that is not enough. That is why we need this aerobic respiration for us to produce more ATP because glycolysis can only produce 2 ATPs. Glycolysis will not provide energy, will not require oxygen, but it will only provide 2 ATPs. So, anong nangyayari dito? Your glucose will be converted into your pyruvate. However, your pyruvate will not be able to enter your mitochondria. So, it has to be converted into your acetyl-CoA so that it will undergo your citric acid cycle. Sa citric acid cycle, we will be able to produce a lot of energy. Pero, do you think that this is still enough? Of course, hindi pa. It needs to undergo now your oxidative phosphorylation. Remember, oxidative phosphorylation. From the name itself, oxidative, and the name itself, aerobic, kailangan niya ng oxygen. So, with the use of oxygen. Remember, ATP is produced from your ADP by oxidative phosphorylation during the reduction of your oxygen in your electron transport system in your mitochondria. Your oxidative phosphorylation with the use of oxygen will produce a lot more of energy that can be used by the cells. That's why if we have deficiency of oxygen, pag wala tayong oxygen, magkakaroon pa ba tayo ng aerobic respiration? Of course, wala nang aerobic respiration kasi nga kulang tayo sa oxygen. Your aerobic respiration and your oxidative phosphorylation will require oxygen. That's why if there is persistent or severe hypoxia, anong nangyayari? Pag mayroon tayong persistent or severe hypoxia or ischemia, it will ultimately lead to the failure of ATP generation and depletion of your ATP in the cells. So pag walang ATP, the cell will not be able to do its function and the cell will basically die. So that's how hypoxia and ischemia affects your cell and cause cellular injury or death. Very good. Next. So ito yung mga critical energy store has deleterious effects on the many cellular systems. So ito yung effect ng ating hypoxia and ischemia. There could be reduced activity of your plasma membrane, ATP-dependent sodium pumps. Kasi nga, ATP, wala ka ng ATP. Increase in anaerobic glycolysis. Since wala tayong enough na energy na napoproduce because of walang oxygen, so our body will go for anaerobic glycolysis because this anaerobic glycolysis will not require oxygen. However, in anaerobic glycolysis, anong nangyayari? Yes, makakaproduce tayo ng energy and ATP, but that's not gonna be enough. And also, there will be a byproduct of your anaerobic glycolysis. Tataas ang ating lactic or lactate. And remember, your lactate is an acid. So therefore, it will further affect the blood pH environment and will still cause cellular injury and death. Remember, your anaerobic glycolysis is only temporary. Next, there's also a structural disruption of the protein synthetic apparatus. So again, ito na yung diniscuss natin. Let's just review. Sige, ischemia. Ano nga yung ischemia? Alam na natin, Doc. May obstruction sa blood flow or may obstruction sa ating blood vessel. So in short, mababa ang blood flow. So mababa ang oxygen. So anong nangyayari? Pag mababa ang oxygen or walang oxygen, anong nangyayari sa ating mitochondria? Remember, doon na nangyayari ang oxidative phosphorylation. Pag walang oxidative phosphorylation or mababa ang oxidative phosphorylation, mababa din ang ating, mababa rin ang ating ATP. And remember, our ATP is essential for sodium pump. And remember, pag mababa ang ATP, we will go for anaerobic glycolysis para to compensate your loss of ATP. Yes, makakaproduce ka ng ATP sa anaerobic glycolysis, pero that's not gonna be enough. Bababa din ang glycogen store, tataas ang acid, bababa o magiging acidic ang blood pH, and we do not want that because this will still lead to cellular injury. Ano pang effect pag mababa ang ATP? There will be detachment of your ribosomes. Pag na-detachment of your ribosomes, bababa ang ating protein synthesis. In short, our cells will not be able to do its function to provide us with different new proteins. Again, dito, pag mababa ang sodium pump, tataas ang influx of calcium and water and sodium and increased influx of potassium. So, tataas ang calcium, water, and sodium. Remember, ano ngang dictum natin? Sa physiology no? Again, physiology, go back. Where sodium goes, sino magpa-follow? Sige nga, let's try. Where sodium goes, water follows. So in short, tataas ang ating sodium, there will be ER swelling, cellular swelling, loss of microvilli, and there will be blebs. So ito na yung makikita natin sa ating cells. Very good. Okay, we're already done with this one. So another mechanism of cell cell injury and death, meron tayong tinatawag na ischemia-reperfusion injury. So, under certain circumstances, the restoration of blood flow to ischemic but viable tissue results paradoxically in increased cell injury. Wow, wait. Parang ironic to, Doc. Tingnan mo, Doc. Sinabi dito na ang restoration of your blood flow to ischemic but viable tissue results to a paradoxical increased cell injury. Parang mali ata, Doc. May blood flow ka. Ito yung blood vessel mo. May bara sa ating blood vessel. That's gonna be your ischemia. So in short, wala tayong blood flow sa kabila. Walang dumadaan na blood flow dito kasi may bara. Pero, pag inalis mo yung bara, mas lalong nasisira ang cell natin. Bakit kaya? Di ba? Dapat, pag binalik natin, dapat ang goal natin is ibalik yung blood flow. Pero pagbalik natin sa blood flow, mas lalo siyang nasisira. Actually, this is only true to your irreversible type na mga severe type na mga injury. Check natin, ano kaya ang reason nito? The main reason of this is that new damage may be initiated during reoxygenation by increased generation of ROS of your reactive oxygen species. Anong ibig sabihin niyan, Doc? Pagbalik ng blood flow, mas tataas kasi ang production ng ating ROS. So ano yung ROS? Later on, we will discuss about your ROS. Next, the inflammation that is induced by your ischemic injury may increase with reperfusion because it enhances the influx of your leukocyte and plasma protein. So ito yung pinaka-importanting mechanism kung bakit ischemia-reperfusion causes injury. Kasi, number 1, pag tinanggal mo yung block or bumalik na yung blood flow, ano nangyayari? Mas tumataas ang ROS, which is can cause injury. Dito, pag bumalik na yung blood flow, tumataas din yung inflammation. Nagkakaroon tayo ng mas maraming leukocyte and plasma proteins which will lead into further injury. So that's gonna be your ischemia-reperfusion injury. So it's a paradoxically can cause increased cell injury. Later on, we will discuss how ROS or reactive oxygen species affects cellular injury. So your oxidative stress, at ito yung sinasabi natin yung reactive oxygen species. So your oxidative stress refers to cellular abnormalities that are induced by your reactive oxygen species, which belongs to a group of molecules known as your free radicals. So in short, these are actually your free radicals. Your free radicals are chemical species, extremely unstable, and readily react with inorganic and organic molecules when generated in cells. They avidly attack nucleic acid as well as variety of cellular proteins and lipids. So basically, these free radicals are very toxic to our body because they can attack different part of our cells. Atakin niya yung nucleic acid, atakin niya yung cellular proteins as well as the lipid. Let's take a look at this diagram. So, the production of your reactive oxygen species is increased by many injurious stimuli. So, tataas ang production ng ating ROS or reactive oxygen species because of this injurious stimuli. Ano ang ating mga injurious stimuli? Nandyan yung radiation, nandyan yung toxins, nandyan yung reperfusion. Diba, ganina, discuss natin yung reperfusion injury. So this is the reason why it will lead to increased production of your reactive oxygen species. What happens next? These free radicals are removed by spontaneously decay and by specialized enzymatic systems. So excessive production. So in short, itong mga superoxide, hydrogen peroxide, and your hydroxyl radical is being removed by these enzymatic systems. This enzymatic system will help us remove these free radicals. So, yung superoxide, yung hydrogen peroxide, and your hydroxyl are actually your reactive oxygen species. So, our body, to compensate with this toxic substance in our body, it will be converted by the different enzymatic system. By your superoxide, your peroxide, glutathione peroxidases, your catalases. Pero, what happens when excessive production of or inadequate, kung merong masyadong maraming pinuproduce na ROS or hindi kayang i-remove lahat ng enzymatic system natin, yung free radicals, anong mangyayari? Then, it will lead to accumulation of your free radicals. In short, dadami ang ating free radicals if sobrang dami nila na hindi sila kayang ma-remove ng ating enzymatic system. What will be the effect of your free radicals? Ito na yung pathological effect of your free radicals. There will be lipid peroxidation. That's why there will be membrane damage. There could be protein modification. That's why there could be breakdown or misfolding. There will also be DNA damage that can lead to mutation. So this gonna be the effect of your reactive oxygen species. Excuse me. Your reactive oxygen species are produced by two major pathways. So, ito yung mga pathway na naproduce ang ROS. ROS are produced normally in small amount in all cells during a redox reaction, or it could be produced in phagocytic leukocytes, mainly in neutrophils and macrophages. But they are produced in minimal amount that the body can be able to still remove that. However, in different injurious stimulus such as merong radiation, merong toxin, merong reperfusion, mas dumadami ang production ng ating ROS. Very good. So, these are the summary of what we discussed. Tingnan lang natin ha, yung different natin na free radicals such as your superoxide, hydrogen peroxide, your hydroxyl, your peroxynitrate. So, these are their mechanisms of your production as well as ways of removal and their pathologic effects. So, I don't want you to memorize this mechanism. I just want you to know how your free radicals is being removed. So, just remember for example, your superoxide can be conversion to hydrogen peroxide and oxygen by superoxide dismutase. So just remember what enzymes your mga enzymatic system and as well as the different pathologic effects ng ating free radicals. So let's talk about toxins, cell injury caused by toxins. So toxins, including your environmental chemicals and substances produced by infectious pathogens, induce cell injury that culminates primarily in necrotic cell death. So there are two general mechanisms. Meron tayong tinatawag na direct acting toxins or meron tayong tinatawag na latent toxins. Pag sinabi nating direct acting toxins, some toxins act directly by combining with a critical molecular component or cellular organelle. In short, you go directly to that specific component of the cell. That's why tinatawag siyang directly acting. Pag sinabi nating latent toxins are not intrinsically active. So, hindi pa siya active but must be converted to reactive metabolites which then act on the target cell. So, in short, if you have this toxin, it has to be converted first by a certain organ inside our body for it to become toxic. Kaya tinatawag natin na latent toxins. For example, your carbon tetrachloride. So your carbon tetrachloride will be converted by the liver into free radicals. So si liver yung nagko-convert sa kanya into your free radicals. That's why it becomes your latent toxin from an inactive metabolite to become an active metabolite. Next, let's proceed with your endoplasmic reticulum stress. Ano po ito, Doc? The accumulation of your misfolded proteins in a cell can stress compensatory pathways in the endoplasmic reticulum and lead to cell death by apoptosis. Later on, we will discuss about your apoptosis. Intracellular accumulation of your misfolded proteins may be caused by abnormalities that increase the production of your misfolded proteins or reduce the ability to eliminate them. Ano ibig sabihin yun, Doc? So, tingnan natin ha. Excuse me. Inom muna ako water, guys. Sorry. Inom na rin kayo water. Sige, tingnan natin. Remember, your endoplasmic reticulum can become stressed. But a mild endoplasmic reticulum stress, what will happen? Kasi we do not want these misfolded proteins. These misfolded proteins is also toxic in our body and will lead to different pathology or different disorder or diseases. Kaya, as our body's mechanism to eliminate the danger of your misfolded proteins, gagamitin natin si endoplasmic reticulum. Pag konti lang yung misfolded protein or tinatawag namin na mild endoplasmic reticulum stress, anong nangyayari? Your misfolded proteins will attach to your tinatawag natin na sensor of misfolded proteins or your IRE1. Basta alam nyo lang, attach siya sa receptors or sa sensor ng ating endoplasmic reticulum. Ang gagawin niya pag naka-attach na tong misfolded protein, it will cause now a signal to increase the synthesis of your chaperones. Ano bang trabaho ni chaperones? Later on, malalaman natin. Increase the synthesis of your chaperone or reduce protein synthesis kasi nga tumadami na yung misfolded proteins and we don't want to provide or to produce more misfolded proteins. To do that, liliitan natin ang production ng ating protein. So, it will reduce protein synthesis and it will also increase protein degradation. Remember, dumadami ang misfolded protein. Ayaw natin ang misfolded protein kasi nakakasama ito sa katawan. So, you have to increase the degradation of this protein. And also, your chaperones will also helpful in the reduction or reduce the load of your misfolded protein. So again, ano nangyayari pag mild ER stress? Simple lang. Your misfolded proteins will just attach to your sensor of your misfolded protein. Then it will send signal to increase your chaperone, reduce your protein synthesis, increase protein degradation. Ang net effect nito is to reduce the load of misfolded proteins. Ito yung tinatawag natin na adaptive unfolded protein response. Again, this is now your adaptive unfolded protein response. So the body can able to suffice or can able to cope up with the presence of your misfolded proteins. However, the problem goes when there is too much misfolded proteins. Kaya dito, pag nagkaroon tayo ng severe endoplasmic reticulum stress, tingnan nyo, lalong dumadami ang misfolded protein. So ano nangyayari? Same pa rin, a-attach siya sa ating receptor or your sensor of your misfolded proteins. Then, it will send signal to the activation of your BH3 proteins. Later on, when we reach your apoptosis, we will know the function of your BH3. Actually, the function of your BH3 is to oppose the action of your BCL. Pag na-oppose yung function ng BCL, it will cause activation of your caspases. So, right now, hindi nyo pa ma-appreciate kasi hindi pa tayo nag-discuss ng apoptosis. But later on, when we discuss apoptosis, you will understand why this happens. So, in short, pag may severe ER stress, lalong dumadami yung misfolded protein, anong net effect? There will be apoptosis. Terminal unfolded protein response or your apoptosis. In short, the body was not able to adapt. Dito nakaka-adapt pa kasi konti lang yung misfolded proteins. Pero pag masyadong marami ng misfolded proteins, our body will not be able to adapt. That's why there will be irreversible cell injury. Ito na yung tinatawag natin na apoptosis. Very good. We will discuss this apoptosis later on. So that's how your endoplasmic reticulum stress causing cell injury and death. So ito na yung sinasabi ko. This is the diseases caused by misfolded proteins. Ayaw natin ng misfolded proteins because these are the different diseases na pwedeng mangyari. Pwedeng magkaroon tayo ng cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs disease, Alzheimer's disease, Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, and etc. So, I don't want you to memorize this one. That's this table for me. This table will only show you why we don't want this misfolded protein. So, for the quiz, I don't want you to memorize this. Of course, it's gonna be unfair in your part because all you have to do is you'll just memorize this one, then check the infected protein and the pathogenesis. No, I don't want that because it's unfair on your part na you're just simply memorizing without understanding the disease itself. And because our main goal here is not to discuss each of these diseases. Hirap kasi pag you just simply cystic fibrosis, CFTR, and then you don't understand that. So that's gonna be unfair on your part. So, point lang kasi ng discussion natin is just a general pathology to understand the concept behind cell injury and death. And dito, yung misfolded protein is we don't want that because it can cause different diseases. So, never mind this table, don't memorize this one. So, remember, when the amount of your misfolded protein is too great to be corrected, excessive activation of your ER sensor activates your mitochondrial pathway for your apoptosis. So, dyan na yung mangyayari yung ating apoptosis. Very good. What else? Meron din tayong tinatawag na DNA damage. So, DNA damage, exposure of cells to radiation or chemotherapeutic agents, intracellular generation of ROS, and acquisition of mutations may all induce DNA damage, which if severe may trigger your apoptotic death. So some toxins act directly by combining with a critical molecular component of your cellular organelle. That's how your DNA damage goes. Your inflammation, your inflammatory cells, including your neutrophils, macrophages, lymphocytes, and other leukocytes, secrete a product that involved to destroy your microbes, but also may damage your host tissues. These are not intrinsically active, but remember, when you arrive in your hematology, you will, or your immunology, you will understand how your neutrophil, macrophages, lymphocytes, or leukocytes trigger your inflammation. I guess there is another chapter, or the next topic pala, we will discuss inflammation with Dr. Solano. Next, these are the common events in cellular injury from diverse causes. So ito na yung mga common events or common events na nakikita natin pag diverse causes. Okay? Remember, maraming causes sa isang particular disease. It could be multiple causation. Diba? We discussed about the etiology kanina. We said that a lot of diseases will have a multiple causation. Ito yung diverse causes. So these are the common events in cellular injury. So we talk about your mitochondrial dysfunction. This is a common event. Remember, mitochondrial dysfunction, pwedeng magkaroon ng necrosis or apoptosis. Kasi pag sa necrosis, pag mababa ay yung oxygen, toxin or radiation, magkakaroon tayo ng mitochondrial damage, bababa ang energy, tataas ang ROS, and can cause cellular abnormalities. And this is actually your necrosis. So we discussed this one a while ago. Next, apoptosis, hindi pa natin na-discuss, but we will discuss it later on. Pero sa mitochondrial dysfunction, paano siya nakakasira? Pag mababa ang survival signal, may DNA or protein damage, tataas ang pro-apoptotic proteins or bababa ang anti-apoptotic proteins, then can lead to leakage of your cytochrome C, and this cytochrome C will induce your apoptosis. Sige lang, later on, this is a type of irreversible injury, your necrosis and apoptosis, and we will discuss that later on. Ano pa? Anong common events pa? Meron tayong defects in your membrane permeability. It can increase your membrane permeability, leading ultimately to overt membrane damage, which is a feature of most forms of cellular injury that culminate in necrosis. So let's talk about the sequence of events in your cell injury and cell death. We already discussed this one. Your cell will have to maintain a homeostatic environment. However, if there is an injurious stimulus, it may cause reversible injury. Pag na-survive ang isang cell for that reversible injury, pwede siyang bumalik into a normal state. However, when it becomes severe or progressive, it will undergo irreversible injury, or what we term now as your cell death. Your cell death can either be necrosis and your apoptosis. For now, first, we will discuss your reversible injury muna tayo. Ito yun, reversible injury. Kita natin sa diagram. Reversible injury is the stage of cell injury at which the deranged function and morphology of the injured cells can return to normal if the damaging stimulus is removed. So ito yung normal cell natin. Reversible injury, stage of cell injury, yung may deranged lang yung function and morphology. Pero the cell, when this cell can recover, it may go to its normal state. So that's reversible injury. So let's identify na the morphologic characteristic. Pag reversible injury, meron tayong dalawang dapat tatandaan. There will be cellular swelling and your fatty change. So ito lang talagang tatandaan natin pag reversible injury. Cellular swelling and fatty change. So what is cellular swelling, Doc? Yung cellular swelling is actually the first manifestation of your cell injury. It's not clearly seen in the microscope but apparent at the level of the whole organ. It's also a result of failure of your energy-dependent ion pumps in the plasma membrane, leading to the inability of maintaining ionic and your fluid homeostasis. Actually, we discussed this one because diba, bababa yung ATP or energy production. So mababa na yung sodium. There will be derangement of your sodium-potassium pump. That is why they cannot maintain the integrity of your plasma membrane. That's why there will be increase of your sodium. Kung ano sabi natin, where sodium goes, water follows. That's why there will be cellular swelling. So it causes pallor, increased turgor, and increase in your organ weight. So that's your cellular swelling. Very basic. Reversible swell. Fatty change. Doc, ano po yung fatty change? Your fatty change occurs in your hypoxic injury and various forms of toxic or metabolic injury. It is manifested by the appearance of small or large lipid vacuoles in your cytoplasm. This occurs mainly in cells involved in and dependent on fat metabolism, such as mga hepatocytes or myocardial cells. So usually fatty change, we can highly appreciate that in your hepatocytes and your myocardial cell. Appearance of your triglyceride containing lipid vacuoles also in your cytoplasm. Excuse me. So ano yung dalawang tatandaan lang natin pag reversible? Sige, tatandaan natin ha. Pag reversible, we'll think about cellular swelling and your fatty change. So ito pa yung other intracellular changes associated with cell injury. It includes, first, plasma membrane alteration such as blebbing, blunting, or distortion of your microvilli and losing of your intercellular attachment. There could also be mitochondrial changes such as swelling and appearance of your phospholipid-rich amorphous densities. Pwede ring dilated ang ating endoplasmic reticulum with detachment of your ribosomes and dissociations of your polysomes. Nuclear alterations such as clumping of chromatin, myelin figures, which are simply collections of your phospholipid resembling myelin sheets. So, tingnan natin sa ating sample. So, first, let's identify this tissue. Ano yung tissue ito? Okay, I know you're already done with histology, so let's identify. Ano nga? I know. Sige, try na. Ano to? You're already done with your histology. I know you can answer this one, so let's try. So, this is a simple cuboidal epithelium. Ano pa nakikita natin? Simple cuboidal. Simple lang kasi nga single layer. And it's like a cube. So that's why it's a cuboidal. Pero it's a tall cuboidal epithelium. Ano nakikita natin? There is also a presence of, tingnan nyo, there's also a presence of, ano tong na mga parang galamay? These are your microvilli. So brush for border microvilli. So this is a very typical picture of your normal kidney tubules with a viable epithelial cell. So very good. So this is the normal picture. Doc, paano pag mayroong reversible? We haven't discussed your irreversible yet, but unahin muna natin yung reversible. Ano nakikita natin sa reversible, Doc? Sige nga, based on the picture, let's compare. Let's compare the normal to reversible. Anong nangyayari? Ano nangyayari? Tingnan nyo. Doc, napapansin ko, Doc, yung epithelial cells natin lalong nagiging eosinophilic. Very good. Tingnan nyo. There is increased eosinophilia. Nagiging increased ang eosinophilia sa ating cells dito. Ano pa? Napapansin nyo? There's also swelling of your cells compared here, compared to your normal cells. Mas lalong lumalaki yung ating cells. These are very typical presentation of your reversible injury. Swelling. Tapos, fatty change. Of course, hindi tayo ma-observe ang fatty change dito. What else? Ano pa nakikita natin? There is also presence of surface blebs. Tingnan nyo. may mga surface blebs sa ating cells. What else? Balik tayo sa ating, there is distortion or blunting of your microvilli. So, tingnan natin. There is distortion. Tingnan natin. Ito yung ating microvilli. Pag tingnan natin dito, hindi na natin na-appreciate. So, in short, there is a distortion of our microvilli. So, this is a very typical picture of your reversible injury. Guys, I know you should know how to compare a normal to your reversible. How about your irreversible? I know we haven't discussed yet, pero I want you to see or observe anong nangyayari. Later on, i-discuss pa natin ang irreversible. Sige, compare natin yung irreversible sa reversible. Anong nakikita nyo? Sige nga, let's try. Anong nakikita? Doc, mas gumulo siya, Doc. Mas gumulo po siya. Very good talaga. That's good. Pero talagang gumulo siya. Pero what would be the better or appropriate term for that? As what you can see, there's already fragmentation of your cells. Tingnan nyo, nagpa-fragment na yung mga cells. What else? Ano pang nakita nyo? Very obvious. Ano pa? Give me one obvious thing. Nakikita nyo? Tingnan nyo. May mga nucleus pa dito. Ang dami pang nucleus. Dito, there is already loss of your nucleus. There is already fragmentation of your nucleus. And also, there could be already leakage of your cellular contents. That's a very typical picture of an irreversible injury. Again, later on, we will discuss irreversible injury. Ang irreversible injury kasi pwedeng maging apoptosis or necrosis.